Bruce/Batman has his hands quite full. He's got to find this spy in order to prevent the Russians from ultimately winning the Cold War, and at the same time, both Bruce and Batman are working overtime to help Ted find his mojo. Because it turns out that Ted is also feeling quite washed up as Wildcat. He's brought his Wildcat gear with him to Austria, but he's really feeling down on his luck. And it gets so bad that Batman actually has to go and start a fist fight with Ted. And Batman holds back, but in the end, Wildcat gives him a pretty good licking. So there's some intrigue during Ted Grant's match with Kozlov, in which Batman is ambushed, and so Ted has to take a break from the fight to help out the Bat. But then when he gets back into the ring, he's tiring, and so Batman has to come up with a tough love tactic to get Ted to get back on his feet and to fight Kozlov again. Really neat story. Okay, now, here's my evidence of this being an Earth B story. Batman comes off as the older, wiser partner. And yes, Batman was the lead character in Brave and the Bold, and as such, there was the expectation that he would be the superior hero, and there would be the focus on his superior intellect and skill set. Yet, it still feels odd to see both Bruce and Batman mentoring a Gold Age character and even resorting to tough love tactics to get Ted/Wildcat back on track. Now, in the Bronze Age, the Earth 1 Batman was not so suspicious and averse to working with government authorities as the post-crisis Batman, who was re-envisioned as a more street-level vigilante who had only one friend on the force, that being Jim Gordon. So, seeing Batman working with Anglo-American intelligence may not have seemed so odd to readers in the 1970s, but we should consider the fact that during the Bronze Age, Denny O'Neil was starting to take Batman back to his roots, and in the main Bat books, Batman was being portrayed as a more brooding, shadowy creature who worked on his own. I think also when we put this in the context of larger Earth B continuity, there were those Brave and the Bold stories where Batman was fighting alongside Sergeant Rock in World War II. So there's evidence that the Batman who we're seeing in issue 88 looks to be only 30, but is actually quite a bit older than that. Now, as for Ted Grant, his hair is going white at the sides and the back, but he seems a good decade younger than the Ted Grant of Earth 2. In general, across these 5 stories, the Earth B Ted Grant looks like a younger man physically, and these stories were being told years before Roy Thomas's All-Star Squadron Annual Number 3, and post-crisis stories which explained that Ted had his 9 lives power, complemented by his exposure to radiation from Ian Karkull that greatly slowed his physical aging. Also, I feel like this Ted Grant did not become the heavyweight champion and Wildcat until after World War II, and this lack of being a boxer and a vigilante during a very dark chapter in human history is why in this story he comes across as softer and more defeated than the Earth 2 Wildcat. Now, if this is the Earth 2 Wildcat that we're seeing in this story, then it does feel sort of like a retread of the Spectre Volume 1, Number 3 by Mike Friedrich. That was the episode which, or the issue, which a lot of readers referred to as a Wildcat issue, co-starring the Spectre. But in that issue of the Spectre, Ted felt washed up and he had to find his confidence before deciding to open the gym in order to train the new generation of fighters. But looking at that story, Ted felt washed up as both himself and his Wildcat, but he wasn't so apprehensive and he still went out there as Wildcat, even when his confidence was at a low point. Now, there is the mention in issue 88 of Brave and the Bold that Ted did open the gym and then lost it, so it could fit in Earth 2 continuity. However, in reading later Bronze Age stories set on Earth 2, such as the All-Star Revival, I don't recall any mention of Ted Grant hitting hard times, losing his gym, and having to start over and get financial help from a certain wealthy colleague in order to get his gym back. All right, let's move on to Brave and the Bold, issue number 97 from August/September of 1971. Again, written by Bob Haney, and some really nice art from William Bob Brown. The title of the story is The Smile of Choclotan. And the story starts with Bruce Wayne vacationing in Mexico, and amongst the sights, he's observing the latest exploits of a young Luis Mercado Jr. He's something of a daredevil who scales tall cliffs and then dives into the river below. And there's an attempt made on Luis' life, and so Batman has to intervene. And in the process, Bruce Wayne discovers that Ted Grant is in Mexico, fighting in his Wildcat costume and going by the name of El Tigre. And Luis Jr. is operating in Ted's corner as his second. So Bruce does, or rather Batman, does some investigating, and he meets up with Luis Jr. and with Ted, and he learns that Ted is amnesiac, and that's why he's going by the name El Tigre. And Luis Jr. explains that years ago, his father was Mexico's greatest boxer, and he squared off in the ring against Ted. And at one point in the match, Ted got resin in his eyes, and Louis Sr. refused to use that distraction to knock out Ted and win the championship. So the fight continued. Ted won on a draw, and both Louis Sr. and Ted became great friends. Some time ago, Ted went to Mexico and met up with his old friend, and they went on a quest to find the giant statue of Choclotan, the god who smiles. Unfortunately, in searching for the statue, they were ambushed by a group of criminals who wanted to steal the statue and sell it for profit, rather than reveal the statue's existence to the Mexican government, who could preserve the site as an historic site. Louis Sr. was killed in the ambush, and Ted was whacked hard enough on the head that it rendered him amnesiac. And so Louis has been helping Ted this whole time. Well, Batman's suggestion is that they go on the quest, and maybe this will jog Ted's memory. And they do, and they end up getting ambushed by the same group of criminals, except this time Ted gets his memory back. He's able to help Batman stop the crooks, and in the end they find Choclotan. And so we get the sense that the statue and the cave that... Oh, sorry folks, I got cut off there by another call. So things end again pretty happily for Bruce and for Wildcat, who's got his memory restored. Now, with the usual one-page explanation / review of the multiverse And the text box mentioning that Batman has been transported to Earth 2, this story could pass as an Earth 2 based story. Here, however, the absence of a mention of the JSA can be explained away as Ted being amnesiac and thus not recalling his time fighting alongside Green Lantern, Flash, and company. But what situates the story squarely in Earth B continuity is that Batman thinks to himself that he learned of Ted Grant's dual life as Wildcat in their previous adventure, and there is an editor's note referring to Brave and the Bold, issue 88. And what I found odd is that nowhere in issue 88 does Batman explicitly state that he has just learned that Ted and Wildcat are one and the same. So my thinking is the Dark Knight must have made this realization somewhere off panel. Okay, moving on. The next story is Brave and the Bold, issue number 110, from December/January 1973, by Bob Haney and artist Jim Aparo, titled A Very Special Spy. And start off with 2 race cars, and they're testing a new type of fuel. And a young man, seemingly a protester, lies down in the middle of a track and almost gets killed. And he identifies himself as Peter Vos, and he says that the company that is running the test, the Triton company, stole his father's formula for this miracle fuel. And he says that prior to his father's death, the plan was for this formula to be released to the public, and it was supposed to be completely free. It would in time replace all fossil fuel based types of energy. But Peter points his finger squarely at Ted Grant and says, "But you, Mr. Grant, your company, Triton, stole my father's formula and his dream." And so Batman is quite interested to learn that Ted Grant has moved on from becoming Wildcat, and some time ago he was given the position of Vice President of Public Relations for the Triton company. And Ted seems oblivious to the fact that the cover story which the president of the company presents is a pretty weak cover story. And Batman, being the master detective, starts a whole investigation into Triton. And we can say that Batman is somewhat perturbed that Ted accepts a very quick excuse from the president saying, no, it's all made up. We came up with the formula ourselves. It's all good. But once Batman uncovers a certain number of facts, Ted clues in and says, okay, well, Wildcat lives again, and he works alongside Batman to take down the company and to make sure that the formula is not turned into something for profit. Okay, in terms of evidence of this being an Earth B story, Ted Grant is a total dupe. Now, granted, the Earth 2 Ted Grant may not have had a higher post-secondary education. However, his training as a fighter and living and fighting crime during one of the most brutal conflicts in human history would have made him much more aware of his environment and be a much better judge of character than the Ted we see in this story. The Earth 2 Ted Grant would not have been so quick to accept the weak cover story provided by the president of the Triton Corporation. If anything, I feel that the Earth 2 Ted Grant would have, quote-unquote, played dumb and have started gathering evidence against the company before taking down the company on his own initiative. As for the Batman we see here, the Batman of Earth B very much resembles the Earth 1 Batman, especially since he's depicted so well by the late great Jim Aparo.